Welcome to That's a Hard No, the podcast about learning to say no and set boundaries to live our best lives. I'm your host, Heather Drago. You may think, because of this podcast, that I'm a boundary setting expert, but I'm not. I'm an expert at struggling to set boundaries. But you know what? I'm working on it, and it is getting easier. Follow along with me as I learn from fellow strugglers and experts so that you too can start saying no without feeling fear, guilt, or FOMO.
You don't know where to go. Unfriendly applications got you feeling low. You're not sure what to do. Weight of expectations is coming down on you. There's a phrase you should know. Tastes so much sweeter than hello. That's a hard no.
So let's say you're a young parent. Your child, 2 years old maybe. They're growing so much at this age. They're walking around, they're learning to talk and smile. Let's say you notice something you don't think is quite right. Maybe they can't form sentences, even though the other kids at daycare can. Maybe they can't handle things like putting a key in a lock or holding a spoon or fork. That can be really scary. Is my child falling behind? Do they have a learning disability? Are they going to be okay? What am I supposed to do? These concerns are not at all rare. At least 15% of kids in the U.S. have at least one developmental delay. I bet that most of those kids aren't getting needed interventions, though. And a big reason why is that parents don't know what to do or where to go. That was the case for today's guest, Sarah Rintamaki. As a young mother, she found herself in this exact situation. When it became apparent that her kids would need early intervention, she didn't have anyone to advocate for her, to help her find the resources and support that her kids needed. She founded a nonprofit, Connecting for Kids, to solve this need in her community, right here in Northeast Ohio. At her organization, they provide resources and support to families with mental health concerns, developmental delays, and disabilities, as well as those facing major life transitions. Well, hi, Sarah. Thanks for coming again to That's a Hard No.
Oh, Heather, it's a true delight to be here again. I was honored that you asked me.
Oh, well, great. So we're going to jump right into some questions and just kind of get the ball rolling. So how do you know if your child is meeting the baseline of what is considered developmentally appropriate? And if they're not, what do you do?
That's an excellent question. So it's a two-part question, right? So let's address the first one. How do you know if they're hitting the milestones? There's a lot of information that's out there. I would start with the child's pediatrician or primary care doctor. They generally have that information and are giving it to the parents, and then going through those milestones at your well visits, which is why it's so important to bring babies and toddlers and preschoolers in for those well visits. Another place that a parent could go is the CDC has them, and Bright Beginnings in Cuyahoga County, or Help Me Grow, if you're just outside of Cuyahoga County in our Northeast Ohio, would have those developmental milestones as well. As far as what do you do if a child isn't hitting a development milestones, the first step, so we say there's a 3-step process. The first step is to have that conversation with your pediatrician. You know, children are not robots. They don't all develop at the same time.
Right.
We often see something that we call asynchronous development, where a child might have really great gross motor skills, is leaping, jumping, skipping well above their peers, and maybe has a slower development for fine motor control because they just don't want to sit in color. Right? Whereas a child who loves to sit in color and craft all day may not be as good of a climber and a jumper. Right? And so there's a range in sort of what is typical. So it's a really good idea to get that hands-on assessment with your primary care doctor, bring up your concerns, and they can let you know, is this a small concern that we should watch, maybe come back in 3 months, or is this something we need to get some other intervention?
if you're seeing one thing off or a couple things off, like how do you know if it's time to ask and have that conversation?
Oh, I always say, if you're worried, ask the question,
Got it.
right? Better to go to a
Right.
professional and have it addressed and say, okay, well, this is a little concern, right? Like, yes, you're right. They are a little bit off, and let's just monitor it. We'll see you again in 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do have a concern or the doctor has a concern, step 2 is there's a free resource in the state of Ohio called Help Me Grow in Cuyahoga County. It's also called Bright Beginnings, where you can get a free evaluation of your child, a comprehensive free evaluation in your home across all the areas of development. And all you have to do is make a phone call. And they'll come out, they'll schedule it, they'll bring in experts. And then once again, they'll have either one of two ways. Either they'll sort of say, well, let's monitor it, and we'll see you again in another 6 months. Or they might say, okay, let's start some therapies or some interventions. We agree with you that this might be some time to get some interventions.
Okay.
And then there is a third step where there is the potential for you to go directly to a service provider. So if you're concerned about speech, you can actually just contact a speech therapist or an occupational therapist or a physical therapist directly and go right to getting some one-on-one consults without even going through the other two. But we really do recommend to families to do, we call it the 1, 2, 3 model, to sort of really get that comprehensive evaluation.
Interesting. And then I don't know if you would know this, but what do you do if your child's older than 3?
Mm-hmm.
And are programs like this available outside of Ohio? Because we have listeners all over the place. I don't know if you would know that, but because we're based here, but
So
yeah.
I'm from what I understand, I can't speak to every state, but I do think there's some form of early intervention in most states where a parent can get an evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
And after 3, I am confident that the all that has changed is that step 2 then takes place at your local public school district, and that is a
Oh, I
national
see.
law.
Okay. Okay.
So if you have a child that's between, let's say, the ages of 3 and 6, and they're not actually in school already, what you would do is contact your local public school district and say that you'd like to have a request for an evaluation for a disability or a developmental concern. And then once again, you'll go through some screening processes and they can either say, hey, we're going to watch it, or here's some interventions that they're going to give.
Okay. So this is true even if your kid's not in preschool through the public school system. If you're
Correct.
living within a school district, they are responsible for that.
Correct. And
I'm
even
sorry,
if
go
you have a
ahead.
child over the age of 6, let's say that you're sending your child to a private school
Mm-hmm.
and they're 8 years old and you're concerned about a learning disability,
Mm-hmm.
at least in the state of Ohio, you would go to your public school district to have that evaluation done.
Interesting. Not through
Mm-hmm.
the like religious faith-based school or through a private school. You would.
There's an occasional large private school that might do its own internal evaluations, but
Mm-hmm.
generally, at least in our area, it's done through the public school district.
Interesting. Okay. And like what can you and can't you ask for when you call, let's say you call up your school district and you're like, I have this concern. Are there limitations or boundaries around what you can and can't ask for?
Absolutely. So first of all, we always say to put everything in writing. So you mentioned make a phone call, but we prefer for parents to put things in writing. That way it's documented that you've put in a request. And they can contact Connecting for Kids, and we've got sample letters that you can send in. And what you're doing is you're actually requesting for an evaluation for a disability, and you need to give some examples in citing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so where this gets to be a little bit of a challenge is that not everything qualifies as a disability that needs intervention through a school district, or even, let's say, like if the child's under the age of 3, it's through Help Me Grow. Not everything that is a delay qualifies for an intervention through the state of Ohio. Like I always like to say, you could be, that borderline. Let's say that you're the C- in skipping, right? Or the C- in fine motor control, right? As a parent, you might say to yourself, I'm really concerned about their ability to hold these scissors or to craft. But the doctors come back and they say, well, they're not that far out of the range of typical. And that's where that step 3 could come in. So you are still able to go and get some interventions if you want and you think that would actually help support your child. You just might have to pay copays for that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the boundary of where you can ask for services from the state. They're going to really pick up things that are 1.5 to 2 standard deviations away, which is a big mathematical term. But really, what they're trying to do is to get the 10 to 15% of the population that's at that lower functioning level to get the intervention.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a child that's sort of still underneath the bell curve, not quite at average, that's generally considered within the realm of typical. And that's where the school district is going to come back and say they just don't qualify.
I see. I see. And then if you then do go to that step 3 and you privately try to find interventions, are there ways to talk about this with your insurance provider if there are certain things that might be covered by insurance versus not? Or do you have any advice there?
Yeah, and so generally what you can do is go and get an assessment from that professional. So let's say it's speech language therapy, right? And you can go in and get an assessment from a speech language therapist, and they'll be able to tell you whether or not your insurance would cover that speech language therapy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, unfortunately, each insurance company has its own standards for what is and isn't acceptable. And so you really kind of need to know, well, with my insurance, which is Aetna or United Healthcare or Blue Cross Blue Shield or whatever it is, would they qualify this kind of a delay in speech or not? And once again, so this is what can be very overwhelming as a
Oh
parent
yeah, I
to
could
try to
so
navigate
much
this.
bureaucracy you're
Um,
dealing with, and I mean, just
and
getting your car registered every 2 years is difficult. Like there's so many steps, and there's also the anxiety and worry and fear. Like what's going to happen for my kid in the future if I don't take care of this now? And
right.
yeah,
And I think it's one of those things where, this is why I started this nonprofit because, when I was going through my own journey as a child, they would say, well, he's not that far behind, and I would say, well, yeah, but I need him to know his R sounds. Like,
mm-hmm.
I personally think it's very important. And so it's navigating the system is very complex and overwhelming, and figuring out how to pay for it can be very challenging. And so that's why we started this organization, so that it's a free place for parents to call in Northeast Ohio. I know you have listeners elsewhere, but hopefully they can find a similar agency in their neighborhood that can help them learn how to navigate
Yeah.
where to find those
And
resources.
you also have great blogs and resources on your website. So even if you don't live in Northeast Ohio, there's great advice there.
Thank you.
Just, yeah, I love your website.
Thank you.
It's great. We'll talk more about that after the break. But so when we're talking about advocating for your kids and conversations with your schools, like where are the boundaries for advocating when it's established that they need these interventions, and like what's the purview of the family versus the school or teachers?
Yeah, it all comes down to really good communication. Probably one of the biggest myths that we have out there is that advocate means fighter and conflict and confrontation, right? And so a lot of parents, when they first come to us, say, well, I know that I'm going to have to fight for every resource for my
Mm-hmm.
child. And what we try to educate them is that if you have an excellent communication with the school, you're more likely to get what you want or what the child needs. And so we have on our website just an awful lot of great resources about how to pull together a communication binder, to bring in examples of work, for example, that your children are struggling with, right?
Mm-hmm.
To be able to ask for, well, how does the team think we should approach it? Right? Or here's a really great one is that oftentimes a child will come home from school, let's say it's a learning disability, and the child comes home and is unable to complete their homework without an enormous amount of assistance from the parent, right? And so the parent says, I think they need more one-on-one time at school because they're clearly not learning the material. I feel like I'm teaching them this every night at homework,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so this is where we have a great, homework communication podcast you can listen to and a template you can follow where you can actually write down and start up a daily communication with your teacher and the team that's there to talk about where they're struggling, how are they struggling, documenting it. Because once you have that data that you can bring in and communicate to the team, then it's much easier to say, as a group, yeah, you're right. You know what? If he's spending 4 hours on this assignment, it should have only taken him 20 minutes.
Right.
So there clearly is a problem here, and we need to address it at the school.
So consistent documentation and communication are the key.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What if it's more social related? Like, what if you need to advocate for emotional, psychological support? There's something going on at school, or the kids just having trouble interacting with peers, and that isn't quote unquote typical, but it's not necessarily academic.
So this is where it gets to be a little bit tricky. And it's really going to depend upon the school district that you're in. So public schools are required to teach the child the curriculum in the classroom. So let's say that a child is able to learn in the classroom near their peers, right? But then they go out on the playground at recess and don't play with anyone, right? It's hard to tie that back into an academic goal, right? So why, the school might come back and say, look, this student has straight A's. They're able to learn all the content we have. They're not struggling, right? In that part. So this isn't part of what we need to teach them in order to have them be successful and learn in the classroom. So once again, it's about that documentation. Students are expected to participate in group projects, for example. So that's where you can start to document. If they can't communicate with their peers, then how can they effectively work in a team?
Right.
And bringing it back to those academic standards is generally what can help get those resources for a family. On the other hand, it can also be beneficial to pull that out of the school day and work on those skills outside of the day. One of the things we often talk to parents about is to ask the child, well, maybe they don't want to be playing with peers during that break time. Maybe they've used all of their energy just holding it together in that classroom.
And they're just exhausted and they just want quiet.
Exhausted and they want quiet.
Yeah.
And they just want to swing,
Or they're
they just
overstimulated already, right? Yeah.
And so a lot of times, what we do is we try to remind the parent to solve the problem that is present, right? And so as long as the child isn't coming home and saying, I'm sad I don't have anyone to play with, right? Then it's not necessarily a problem, right? And then if it is a problem for the child, then go back to the team. And once again, with that documentation about how that will help and affect their ability to learn.
That's interesting. It's like, it takes a little bit of self-reflection. Is this really a problem, or is this a kid not meeting my expectations of normality, quote unquote? Interesting. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back, and we'll be talking more with Sarah Rintamaki of Connecting for Kids. That's a Hard No is brought to you by Clever Girl Marketing, my full-service agency specializing in smart, strategic marketing solutions for businesses and nonprofits. Okay, so you're probably wondering, Heather, what's with the podcast about boundaries? Why not marketing? Well, maybe in the future, but for now, it actually does relate, so bear with me here. Smart marketing, strategic marketing, requires knowing what to say no to and why. Businesses and nonprofits get inundated with marketing options and offers every day. We help you cut through all that noise, focus on your specific needs, and develop actionable strategies that are doable and actually make sense. Whether it's websites, SEO, email, social, or traditional channels, we're experienced in all of it. So if you need help figuring out your marketing, visit our website, clevergrowmarketing.com, and get in touch. Sarah, when we talk about asking for interventions and communicating with the schools, like, what's the order of operation? Like, who do you talk to first, or at school? I know we already talked about pediatrician. Like, what's kind of the, pecking order or the ladder of communication that you work up? And then what do you do if you feel like your needs or your child's needs aren't being met?
So the process is different if your child's already in school or not in school. So if you have a 4-year-old who's not attending a school, you have to go to the main office. right? The student pupil services director or the superintendent of the school, the main administration building. And there you sort of send in a letter and ask for an evaluation, and the evaluation kicks it off, right? If your child, let's say, is in kindergarten and you're worried at that point, your first step is the child's teacher. So the first thing you should do is schedule a parent-teacher conference and say, hey, I'm really worried about, let's say, their ability to cut this sheet of paper. Are you worried about that too? Right? And then the teacher is the one that kicks it off. They could say, you know what, I am kind of worried about it, but it's not within the realm of too much worry. But you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them extra cutting practice, or we're going to do some of these interventions within the classroom, and let's touch base within a month and see if there's some improvement. Right?
Okay.
If that doesn't do well, like, hey, we didn't see a lot of improvement over the last month, then it kicks off the evaluation. All right, let's go ahead and let's start the evaluation process.
And if they don't say it to you as the parent, you can say, I would like an evaluation.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's where, you start off the evaluation. The school has the ability to say, we don't think there should be an evaluation, right? And then if they refuse to do the evaluation, there's a way to escalate that and appeal it. Right?
Okay.
But let's say that they go through and they do the evaluation, right? Then what they do is they have a meeting where they go over the evaluation and the results from that. So everybody's in agreement. Hey, we looked at him, and his ability to use his fine motor skills are 2 standard deviations below the rest of his peers. So therefore, we do think he needs to meet with an occupational therapist once a week to start working on those skills, right? And then if everybody agrees, yes, this is a fair evaluation, we all agree with this data, they go ahead then and write what's called an individual education plan.
Yep. The IEP.
Or an IEP, yes. And then that sort of, gets monitored and rewritten every couple of years, and there's another every 3 years, there's another evaluation process and all of that. Now, what can happen is you go through the evaluation process and they say, you know what, we don't think that he qualifies. We just don't think his cutting is that far behind the peers. In which case you do have the ability to go outside and get an independent evaluation from somebody else to see if they think and come up with different results. And then if that doesn't work, so let's say you get an independent evaluation result and they come up with something different. You bring it back to the school and the school still says, nope, we don't agree. Then you're at the point where you've got a bunch of different options. In the state of Ohio, at least, you can bring in a mediator or facilitator for free to help you reconcile the independent evaluation and what the school district found. And that's free. You also have the ability to bring in a parent mentor to be able to help advocate.
Okay.
Or you can actually go out and hire a legal firm and take it to the court system.
Right. And there are legal firms that specialize in special education advocacy. This is what they do all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have about 50 of them in the Northeast Ohio area. So we have them in our directory to be able to go and get a consultation with them if that's the route that you want to take.
You don't speak for the entire country, and you're really focused locally in Cuyahoga County and Northeast Ohio. And you may not have all the numbers in front of you, but I'm wondering if you can kind of give our area schools, our region's approaches to education and intervention, like a grade. Like, how do you think we are doing in terms of helping families address these different needs?
I think the part that makes me very, very sad, Heather, is that the grade varies widely by school districts. So our public school system in Ohio is based largely on property taxes.
Yeah.
And so you have very wealthy districts that do very well and help with things that aren't even directly tied to the curriculum, like a social emotional learning, social development, emotional intelligence, right? And then you could have just a couple miles down the road, a school district that can barely keep a speech language therapist on staff to be able to do basic remedial therapy. And that's the part.
So it's very inequitable. It's just
very
dependent on where you live, and
then by racial lines.
Yeah.
Our community is still very segregated, and so those communities of color often have less resources.
And I know in the state of Ohio, there's been like the Supreme Court of Ohio has said it's inequitable and it's unconstitutional and we shouldn't be funding it this way. But like in the meantime, it's still happening. And how do we help these kids?
Well, what has been great about Ohio, at least, is that they've come up with some funding streams where you can pull your children out of the public schools and put them in the private schools.
Okay.
And that is a great outcome. Where the barrier comes in is that parents don't always have the transportation to get their children to those private schools. So that's where we really see the inequities now is one, are the parents educated enough to know that they could call us and look for one of those private schools that has more resources and use those scholarships? And then two, can they get the child there?
Are there resources for that?
No, unfortunately, during pre-COVID, there were a couple companies that would transport children. Mm-hmm. They all went under COVID or, went out of business during COVID, and none of them have come back.
Oh, wow.
And so it is really, that is probably the hardest part right now is when we're talking to a parent who says, I don't have a car or I can't drive my child 40 minutes each way because I work.
Right, because I have a job and other children and Oh, wow. So what can we do as a society to address some of these things? Do you have any opinions?
I think we need, I think we've got to change this extremely segregated school system we have here. Like it is so discouraging to me that I will hear a story about a family. Here's a great example. My own child, when they were in kindergarten, would become overwhelmed and aggressive. Right. And so at one point, my child became so aggressive, he lashed out and struck the teacher.
Oh.
Right. And what happened was they called me and my husband in to have a meeting. And they said, what we're going to do is we're going to do something called a functional behavior analysis, an FBA, where we're going to try to figure out why did he get so overwhelmed? And what can we do to prevent him from getting so overwhelmed so that he feels like he has to be aggressive? Mm-hmm. And then what we're also going to do is we're going to give him some extra hours of one-on-one coaching so that when he does become overwhelmed, he's got some tools to be able to do something different. Right? Still a very scary situation, very overwhelming for my husband and I, but wonderful resources. At the same time, just 2 weeks ago, I had a family who called me from another school district that's predominantly Black, who had a kindergartner.
I'm afraid of what you're going to tell me here because I think I know where this is going.
Who was on an IEP, had the same struggles as my child. The child became overwhelmed, hit the teacher, and they suspended the 5-year-old for 5 days.
Yeah. Or you hear stories like this on the news and they arrest them and handcuff them, which is bananas. But anyway, sorry.
For a 5-year-old.
Yeah, right. So you can't do better than that.
Yeah. Well, now the 5-year-old has learned, if I hit the teacher, I don't have to go to school.
All right.
Right? Because she's a smart little cookie.
Yeah. They learn that or they're traumatized in some way.
Right. So that's the inequities that frustrates me to no end.
Yeah.
That we could have that kind of approach in a very inequitable way where two children who are struggling with the same thing are going to have very different outcomes.
Yeah.
Based upon the school district's response.
Yeah, it's infuriating that it's just we've all become complacent to it as a society and just allowed it to keep happening. And even though it's been ruled unconstitutional, here we are, how many years later?
Yeah.
Very frustrating. Yeah.
Very frustrating.
Yeah.
The second thing, if I can put in one more thing, is that
please.
There used to be parent mentors who could meet with parents in at least every county. That you could call up for free.
You mentioned that earlier, and that did perk my ears a little bit.
Yeah, and so there used to be, easily 30 or so in the Northeast Ohio area where a parent could go and meet with them. And we're down to about 8. And one of them actually is covering 6 counties all by herself.
Oh my goodness.
So I think that the funding continues to get cut for that parent mentor and that parent education part. And that's the frustrating part, because I think the more a parent feels educated about it, the more they're going to understand how to advocate appropriately and effectively, right? Like this is the whole thing, is it's not to go in there, blazing mad and ready to fight. It's about knowing how to fight and what you're fighting for and what you're trying to get as your outcome. That's effective. And many parents need a mentor to be able to help them with that.
Wow. Well, this sort of leads me into my next question is for you to tell us a little bit more, for those who haven't met you already on our podcast. Tell us more about Connecting for Kids and what you're doing in schools and communities and how people can find you. Because in a way, you guys serve as parent mentors. You have this amazing database of resources on your website, which is amazing to me. But tell us more.
Yeah, so we are a parent organization, and what we do is we connect those parents to those resources, to support, to community. We will walk them through the IEP process or the evaluation process. We can give them sample letters. We can talk about the communication binders. What we don't do is go into that meeting with them. So we
Right.
don't go and sit next to them. And that's where I feel like many parents would like to have somebody who's there with them at that meeting during that time. But we just don't have the funding and the resources to be able to do that level. But it is free to any family in the Northeast Ohio area to call us and schedule a one-on-one with one of our family resource specialists. And they can talk about anything, any concern for any child 0 to 12 years old, whether it's about academics like this, dyslexia, an IEP, or whether it could be anxiety, a mental health issue, or it could just be the parents are going through divorce and the child's having a hard time. Whatever the parent is concerned with will help them.
And I know you also support LGBTQ families so that
We do.
they have community and kids who are questioning, exploring. You help parents navigate through all of that.
Absolutely. So yes, so whether the parents identify as LGBTQ
Right.
or whether the child is exploring gender or sexuality, we have all kinds of resources. We have an ongoing support group that we partner with, and then we can help connect to affirming counselors. There's a wonderful youth center that kids can drop in at, and events and community so that parents can feel supported.
It's wonderful. Wonderful. So I also know that you're a bit of an expert on this new law in Ohio surrounding intervention for dyslexia in the schools. And tell us more about that and what Connecting for Kids is doing in regards to this new policy.
Yeah, and if you're like, if there's a listener out there that does not have this dyslexia screening law in place, it would absolutely be something to advocate for. In this, we haven't seen the data yet from Ohio, but in the states that have put in this dyslexia screening law, 1 out of every 5 children becomes screened for dyslexia.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that a staggering statistic?
That's amazing. And I mean, that's way more than previously thought, right?
Absolutely. And so what they found is that it's actually a spectrum. I feel like they're going to say everything is a spectrum going forward, right? And so, what the school districts were picking up before was that end of the spectrum with the children with severe dyslexia. And yet what we're really finding is when we go through this screening process, we're picking up those kids with moderate to mild dyslexia. And that can be extremely powerful with getting early intervention to those children and additional resources to be able to help them thrive. And so there was a new law that was passed. It's called Ohio Bill 436 and is only for public schools students. So I really want that part to be clear because there are a lot of people that send their children to private schools in our community. And so we really want to get the word out there that it's a good question to ask, is your private school doing the same screenings or not? And if not, they could reach out to us and we could help connect them to how to get a screening done.
Okay.
Because it can be really, really powerful.
Now, if I understand, the law says all children up to grade 3 get tested.
Well, this was last year.
Okay.
What they did was all children in kindergarten through grade 3 were screened last academic year.
I see.
And then going forward, it will only be kindergartners because they kind of caught up. So each year when you come in, part of the kindergarten process will be a screening for dyslexia and then a plan for intervention after that. Now, what's super confusing is they decided that a lawyer had to write the results from that screening. So the parents get this very, very confusing letter in the mail that never actually says the word dyslexia. Instead, what it says is specific learning disability. And it says your child has been screened for a specific learning disability and found that they needed intervention at the school district.
Okay.
Which most parents are like, I don't even know what that means. But
Right.
really what it means is they have some form of dyslexia, and then depending upon the level of dyslexia will determine the outcome of the level of intervention that they're going to have.
Forgive my ignorance. I don't know a lot about dyslexia, so it's partially why we wanted to talk to you.
Okay, well, one of the things I love to talk about is the warning signs in
Yeah,
preschoolers for
that's where I was going
dyslexia,
to go. Like,
because
how do
I
you
don't
know?
think they're common.
Oh,
So one of the most common things is, can they do a nursery rhyme or chant? So if I say Jack and Jill went up the,
hill,
right, to fetch a pail of,
water.
right. So if you are working with a 3-year-old and you say Jack and Jill went up the, and they can't come up with the word hill and be able to help you identify that Jill and hill rhyme, right? That is actually a really, really good clue that they could have dyslexia, those rhyming words. Other things are speech delays, and so I think this is one of the things where, if they do have those problems making those sounds, if they do qualify for speech language therapy, oftentimes they will have a form of dyslexia as well. And then the last one is difficulty following multi-step directions. So if you say, hey, Susie, I want you to go get your shoes from your room and then your water bottle from the fridge and meet me back here. And they're not able to follow that by 3 or 4, which most 3 and 4-year-olds can. That's a good clue too. Now, there's other ones, like, for example, many kids with ADHD or attention issues also struggle. So it could be something else.
Right.
But actually, there's a really, really high level of comorbidity between ADHD and dyslexia as well. So,
Interesting.
if you're given those multi-step directions and they're not able to follow them, that's another great warning sign for these young kids.
If your kid is in a private school, you said ask the school if they do the screening. Can you ask the public school district for this? Like we were talking before, if your kid's under a certain age, if you
It
suspect
depends.
something.
It depends. It depends upon what you suspect and what you have for data to see if they qualify for an evaluation. So once again, you can write a letter and say that, once again, you're sort of asking at that point for, we'd like to have them evaluated for a disability, and here's why. He's behind in reading, he's struggling with these kinds of things, and see if they agree that that's enough to be able to warrant the screening. Your other option, unfortunately, is to private pay. And to get a private evaluation is generally not covered through insurance. So most medical insurance providers won't pay for any learning disability evaluations. Some will, but the majority will not. And at least in the Cleveland area, is running about $2,000 right now.
Oof.
So it's quite a hefty.
Yeah.
There is a group that is out there that will do free screenings about once a quarter. So that's a good way to kind of look at it too, that if you don't have the funds and you can't get your public school to do a screening, you could go to one of the free screenings and just type in, free dyslexia screenings, children.
Right. Interesting. Okay, well, that's good information. Well, thank you for enlightening me a little bit about dyslexia. And I want to talk just before we go a little bit more about your organization. I know I've been to some of your events and I've heard first person stories from parents talking about the amazing impacts your group has made and how you've helped their families. And one of those events was your annual fundraiser, which I know is coming up. And so I would like you to kind of tell us a little bit about your impact, and you're a nonprofit organization and you have a fundraiser coming up, how people can support you either at that event locally or how they can support you if they're further afield.
Well, like you said, we are a small, struggling grassroots nonprofit. We started this in my living room, and we are still in my living room right now. But it's a personal passion of mine that parents need to be educated about these things, and that there just aren't enough resources out there. So yes, so we do have a fundraiser coming up on November 9th. If anyone's in the local area, it's a casino night.
It's super fun, you guys. It's
And
so
Heather
fun.
will be there. So thank you, Heather, for being
Sure.
there. But if you're not able to make it, one, you can still bid on the silent auction items if people want to get excited about some of our items that will be up for bid. We also have an opportunity to just donate. So you can go online and even $10 a month can make a huge difference to a local family that might need that resources, community, and support.
Fantastic. Well, I highly encourage everyone, if you haven't already, to go to the Connecting for Kids website, connectingforkids.org. There are amazing resources, podcasts, blog posts. I even love I actually am stealing this from you, Sarah. On your emails, you have this in your signature, it says she, her, and then you have a little thing that says why this is important. And then you click on it and it goes to your website and it talks about respecting people and being inclusive. And I pointed that out to our people and I was like, I want to do something like this on our website because I just think it's so important and so thoughtful. So I just think you're a stellar human being and I love everything you're doing. And just so you know, guys, Sarah started this, 10, 12, 15, 13 years ago. And it started in our local library, in our little community, and it has spread across Northeast Ohio. And you help tens of thousands of families every year, and it's just a phenomenal organization.
Well, thank you, Heather. I appreciate the support you've always given us. Yeah, and it is, it's one of those things where we average, it's just a great way to think about it, 8 to 10 parents who contact us every day.
Wow.
And it's really affirming to be able to help a parent who's really concerned to at least know what are the 3 steps I need to take or the 4 steps I need to take to be able to solve this problem.
Or how do I, how do I wrap my head around this issue? Yeah. 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 So you don't have to be alone. There's a whole community of families that you can connect with. Okay. Well, thanks, Sarah. This has been really, really, really helpful. And I know there will be lots of families listening and I appreciate your time and your expertise.
Well, thank you, Heather.
That's a Hard No is a production of Clever Girl Marketing, my little agency in Cleveland, in partnership with our friends at Evergreen Podcasts. Many thanks to our amazing team, including Laura Del Rosario, our production and marketing coordinator, Noah Fouts, our amazing producer, editor, and composer who wrote our theme music and performed it with his band, The Big Leagues, and our new video producer and editor, Kay Holmberg. You can find show notes and resources on our website, and you can find other fun stuff on our socials. We're Hard No Podcast. Find your no, then say it with me.